You're watching the Hard Facts, viewers. From Parliament to TV studios to social media to the street, everyone seems to have an opinion on Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's budget that she presented yesterday. Many people believe that the budget is too conservative, others believe that it is visionary. The truth, viewers, needs to be decoded. And we're going to get you two perspectives. Raghuram Rajan, ex-RBI governor, is going to join us and talk a little bit about his view. And Professor KV Subramanian, executive director, IMF and former CEA, is going to give us his perspective. Perhaps the twains will meet. We'll have to wait and see. But let me first go straight across to Mr. Raghuram Rajan. Thank you for speaking to me, Mr. Rajan. Let me begin by asking you some questions straight off. Look, please, straight into the camera as I ask you these questions. Mr. Rajan, top-line numbers, as announced by the finance minister yesterday, appeared to be very sound. The budget keeps the fiscal deficit down, projects a shrinking of primary deficit, and yet keeps capex high. Tax GDP ratio is also on the up. Would you agree then that we're poised, as India is poised to grow at 7% GDP from here on?
Well, I think the growth and budget issues are different, right? This is a conservative budget. It tries to do all that it needs to do within a framework of fiscal consolidation, and certainly at first glance seems to have achieved that. We are narrowing the fiscal deficit. That's a necessity. And at the same time, some of the objectives that the government has, such as maintaining the capital expenditure program that it has initiated in the past, and in fact expanding it somewhat, as well as paying some attention to some of the issues brought up in the elections, such as joblessness, which has also been highlighted in the economic survey. I think it's tried to, deal with some of these. So there is, from a bond trader's perspective, there's much to like in the budget.
Okay, well, the budget is being commended for recognizing the limits of seeking to meet the unemployment or inequity challenge entirely through SOPs, reveries, or welfare measures. It says that we need to pivot away from that direction. This is obviously to be welcomed. Would you agree?
No, I would say that where the budget falls short is in laying out a much more ambitious plan to tackle the issues of employment. Let's be frank. India is in danger of wasting its population dividend. And we have a window of about 15 years to essentially, take advantage of that population dividend. But with the job creation levels at where they are, there's a risk that many of our youth enter the labor force and don't find work, and therefore we don't get that growth boost that many other Asian economies got when they were at our level of per capita income and with our demographics. So when I see the measures, I think they're in the right direction, no doubt. But I think of them as small relative to the challenge that we have. And when you look at, for example, the measures ABC in promoting job creation, first, we have no idea whether they will work, whether they're sufficient to get firms to actually bite the bullet and hire more people. And second, there's no sense that we're going to experiment and potentially put more funds to work. It's in the tradition of here is a 5-year program to do this stuff, but we need far more intensive work here looking at how we can bring measures to increase employment, which implies both skill building, but also incentivizing firms, especially in employment intensive sectors, but also monitoring progress. We've had so many skill building programs which haven't worked. Why didn't they work? What have we learned from them that is going to make these new programs work? I think there are lots of suggestions in the budget, but I have no idea how they will play out, and I have no idea how the government intends to make them work.
Okay, well, look, we'll talk a little later on the ALI scheme and is it enough to create the jobs? But I just want to continue from where I left off in the previous question. What I'm trying to get at is that the budget signals a pivot away from conventional thinking that governments must adopt the path of high growth with relatively low focus on employment, so long as it gives, the growth gives the resources to offer substantial welfare schemes. Now, this approach still, it appears to me, governs thinking in the states, opposition or those that are ruled by the ruling regime. Do you think that opposition ruled states now need to perhaps rein in this instinct? For example, some opposition parties are still insisting on special status, for example, for some states, which is code really for soft saturation. Have we come to that time when we need to move away from that thinking?
Well, I think the message from the election was that people are clearly, they will take the sops you give them, but they also want to be independent. They want to stand on their own feet. They want good jobs for themselves, for their children. And they're frustrated because the system doesn't seem to be providing that. And you can see with the pressure on admissions, with all the scandals on NEET and so on, that this is also showing up in admissions to high quality educational institutions. I think you're absolutely right that both at the center and at the state government, we haven't paid enough attention to the public provision of services like education and healthcare. And even in this budget, you don't see an expansion in the amounts devoted, for example, to education. It's not a central subject alone, but you would think that the center would devote more resources to this very important need, especially given that going forward it talks about much more research and development and intellectual property creation. It has even set up a fund for that. But if you don't fund your high quality educational institutions, bring more teachers back into it, bring higher quality teachers, we're not going to make that kind of progress. So what this budget seems to be doing is paying attention to the areas that are needed, but without a grand plan of how we're going to move forward. And that's where I say the resources that are being devoted seem relatively small compared to the needs. For example, our needs on education, from the kind of furor you see on the streets, are much higher than what governments, both at the state and the center, seem to consider. There are some states which have done a lot of human work on education, the Delhi government, for example. But we need many more examples of this if we are to succeed.
Pointedly, let me ask you, do you believe that those canvassing for special status for states are missing the woods for the trees? The government has thus far resisted this demand, even when it's come to its own allies, Andhra and Bihar. It has wanted to sort of create resources or raise resources for schemes that deliver infra, for example, so it doesn't come without conditions. Now, do you think this is the right approach, and do you think ultimately we should move in that direction, and states that are demanding these sort of special status, etc., should sort of also give up on this?
Well, I think it's understandable politically for states that have political sort of leverage over the center to demand more. And special category states is one way of getting that in a way that is less tied, where the funds are less tied. And of course, the center believes that it knows what is best, and it wants to tie the funds that it gives and basically say that, okay, if you invest in infra, if you invest in this or that, you will get the funds. This is going to be, this is going to go on for the duration of this government because it does not have a majority and depends on these parties until such time as it can, it can get more internal support. So I think that we're going to see this play out. I mean, there is a key issue which will be on the table over time. Should the states be trusted to figure out their development plans, or does the center have to determine those development plans for the states and just fund what it thinks are appropriate? And it's going to be a back and forth. It's going to test the issue of fiscal federalism.
So moving away, obviously, from the politics and the compulsion, do you think demanding expensive special status schemes or packages, or call it what you want, to actually work?
Well, I think the states would want them, but I think that is going to create resentment amongst the states that are not sort of so privileged. And, this is a quagmire in the longer run if every government is going to pay off the states that it relies on for its support. I do think that we need some principles. We tried to devise some principles in the past that some of the states that were backward economically speaking, so long as they showed signs of broader progress on broad measures like economic growth and the welfare of people, they should get more funds, which they should spend as they choose, because they have shown progress in the right direction. And since we are a union of states, and since we don't want states to fall behind significantly, it's in every state's benefit if everybody else grows. Some fiscal packages are warranted, but of course, we have to make them based on clear principles rather than on these guys are supporting my government.
Now, the budget hopes that employee incentives will create jobs. Do you think the ELI scheme will work?
I don't know. I don't want to dismiss it. I just think that we've had so many schemes, including skill building schemes in the past. What we need is a way of experimenting quickly, monitoring, trying to see what works, and expanding that much more. I would hope that we would learn from the experiences of different states that have such schemes. Tamil Nadu, for example, has some schemes on training sort of young engineers in software, for example. But we can take best practices from the states, but also experiment. And as we learn what works, put more funds into it. Now, does 3,000 rupees a month in terms of support for your EPF obligations, is that enough? I don't know. Let's see how this works and be very careful about measurement. I think one of the concerns I have is that we have not measured how things have happened. Perhaps a little scared of what we'll find if we sort of look at how expenditures have panned out.
Now, how many marks? I mean, I hesitate to ask, how many marks will you give the FM for her effort, or what is the adjective you'd use to define this budget?
Let me not sort of purport to be a professor. Sort of, she's not a student. She's a very experienced finance minister who's steered the economy for some time. What I would say is, the budget does well in maintaining fiscal conservatism. And I think that deserves a lot of credit. However, I would say that given the challenges the economy sort of now has before it challenges that were revealed in the election outcomes, I think that we have to be much more ambitious in the kinds of actions we take, and we risk by being cautious, sort of underinvesting in many of the areas that need investment today if we are going to maintain the kind of growth that we need. And that, to my mind, over caution is as big a sin as over aggression in these times.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to me, Raghuram Rajan, and giving us your point of view. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. Let me go across now to Professor KV Subramanian, Executive Director at the IMF and former CEA. Just to give you a bit of a background, Mr. Subramanian, we've just spoken to Raghuram Rajan. He has his point of view, and therefore let me frame the questions in the backdrop of what he has basically said, or his assessment. Mr. Rajan believes that the budget is too conservative in addressing the big challenges like employment and reducing equity. Do you share that view, or do you have a counter narrative there?
Rahul, I think the budget, in my opinion, is quite ambitious. In fact, if you look at the emphasis on employment creation, and I've always maintained that employment is and high quality jobs, these are the ways to reduce inequity in our society as well, because jobs lead to far more inclusive growth. Not only do they enhance consumption, but at the same time, they also are very critical for social and economic inclusion. So in that perspective, the emphasis, which is unprecedented on employment, is something that is welcome. I would say that among the many packages, among the six-pronged approach that the Honorable Finance Minister has talked about, I am far more convinced that the incentives that are being provided to the employer will work. And I say this based on the evidence that we've seen for the Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Yojana, Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana, and the previous Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Yojana that was done, COVID and pre-COVID. If you look at the evidence on the Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana, that actually created a good amount of jobs. Last count, I think about 20 lakh jobs saved them. And I think that's clear evidence that when you give incentives, and in this case, it was given through the EPFO contributions being taken care of. I'm actually waiting to see how the incentives given to employees will work, because if you think about it, the binding constraint really here is on the employer side, not as much on the employee, because the employee certainly wants to get employed. But I think in terms of the emphasis, I actually do not think it is conservative. If anything, I feel that this is actually ambitious enough, and I'm really glad that this has been put on the agenda, through the budget.
The massive debate raging on demand for special status. The government has so far resisted giving in to these demands. Mr. Rajan, we spoke to him, believes that these demands have to be accepted on the back of government not actually enjoying a majority. What is your view? Do we have to just live with these demands and perhaps at some level entertain them?
So Rahul, here as economists, I actually am absolutely convinced that we need to be speaking equally consistently with respect to center and states. We cannot be differentiating, one rules for the center, one rule for the states. I think a lot of the reforms that have to be done by the states. If we look at a state like Karnataka, or even what is happening, possibly in Telangana. I think Telangana not as bad, but Karnataka is certainly bad. The freebie culture that is being created, and I think the economic ruins that it is leading to. Economists like us actually should be calling that out consistently, irrespective of whatever our political preferences are. I think, I would equally say what has been attempted in Maharashtra, for instance, is not something that I'm supportive of. It is far better to create assets rather than give freebies, because the creation of assets actually leads to far better outcomes. And I think what better evidence than what we've seen in a state like Gujarat, or in a state like Madhya Pradesh, where consecutively chief ministers have demonstrated that by doing good, economics, they can actually convert it into good politics. I would like to highlight here that I think the lacuna seems to be in some sense the inability of the political leaders to communicate good economic ideas. If we look at the Honorable Prime Minister, he has been a very good communicator, and therefore he has been able to translate that good economics into good politics. Of course, one has to take into account the fact that the recent elections there were some reverses, but over a more than 2-decade period, it is actually demonstrative of the importance of good communication. Just because some of the state leaders do not have the ability to communicate, them resorting to freebies is not something that I approve of. And I, in fact, call upon my colleagues in the economist community to be fair in judging these, rather than actually letting their political preferences decide some of these aspects.
Well, time for honesty. Time for honesty, viewers. Time for honesty. The first part of this show exposed some of the political motivations behind the critique of Nirmala Sitharaman's budget. This one was this side of the fence. We sort of discussed a little more in depth from a qualitative and more informed perspective what the budget actually sets out to do. We leave it at this. Anand Narasimhan with The Right Stand.